All right, welcome back to another episode of the Doc Talk. And today, Dr. Haya and myself, we are going to be talking about intermittent fasting. This is a way of eating that has gained popularity over the past few years. And today, we want to discuss this
Mhm.
and talk about some of the benefits of this, what we think about this, who it's right for, and what can you realistically expect out of this. But first, many people classify this as a diet. I don't like the term diet because diet to me means like you're going to do something for a short period of time and then achieve some goal that is set. But for some reason, it's not permanent because then you stop and then it rebounds. So a diet is like a yo yo thing. Intermittent fasting is a way of living, it's a lifestyle. You are doing this forever. So why don't you start off with a little background on this and what this is?
Yeah, so I like that you called it a way of eating because it truly is that. It's basically how humans have evolved to eat. That's how we've always eaten. Okay, the today we have this continuous fed state where we're always eating whenever we want to. Food is so readily available, but it wasn't always like this, right? If you go back even a couple of hundred years, all day we were either hunting, gathering, farming, foraging, doing whatever we were doing to get the food, and then at the end of the day, there was a meal, right? So we were naturally intermittent fasting. Okay.
Correct.
And so our bodies weren't evolved to exist like this.
So what you're saying is this modern way of as soon as we wake up, we're eating something all day long, towards the end, having a dessert and going to bed. This is not how we're designed to
No,
operate.
absolutely not. No, no.
Okay.
And there's different forms of intermittent fasting, right? So why don't you give us a little bit a description of all those different forms?
Yeah, so so intermittent fasting. What this really means is it's a period where you do not eat anything, so food restriction, and then there's a certain amount of hours where you eat. Okay, so the most common form out there is the 16-18. What that means is you're fasting for 16 hours and then you're eating for 8 hours. Um, Many individuals like to put the fasting phase in the nighttime, which is fantastic because you're actually sleeping through the majority of your fast. And then when you wake up, you basically end up skipping breakfast and then you push your lunch a little forward by an hour or two just to fit that 16 hours in. And then you eat in your 8 hours. There's another method where you're eating regular for 5 days and then 2 days you're in a severe calorie restriction around 500. There's fast, eat, alternative day windows. That 16-8 can also be extended for a longer fast duration, less window of eating. But that all depends on where you are on the spectrum of intermittent fasting. If you're just starting, obviously you do not want to do some of the advanced level ones. You would start somewhere around, the 16-8 is a good place to start
It's a
off
good
at.
starting spot.
And that's where we started at.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us how this journey started for us and how we're doing?
Yeah, so it started during medical school, right? So we were just, trying to learn about how to stay more fit. We had joined the gym and we were trying to look for healthier substitutes in our diet. And I think, to be honest with you, at least for me, the catalyst for going on this kind of a eating journey was that I have a really hard time, and I think we both have a really hard time restricting what we're eating when we're eating. So, when we sit down to eat, we like to enjoy our food, right?
Correct.
We like to overorder, we like to try different things, okay? And so if we were sitting down to eat more frequently, we were consuming more calories, we were consuming more unhealthy things. And so we were looking for something where we would just sit down to eat less frequently so that we would have almost a little bit more freedom to be able to choose the things that we were eating.
And that's one of the benefits of
Yeah.
intermittent fasting is because, you know, naturally, if you're skipping a meal, let's just say, for example, breakfast, a typical American breakfast can easily hit 1,000 calories plus easily. So if you're skipping that meal, then if you're only going to be eating in that short extended period of time, that 1 or 2 meal that you have, you can actually, enjoy them more, add a little calories extra there.
hmm Yeah. So that's where we started with the 16-8 pretty strictly. And then over the years, we transitioned more and more into a longer and longer fast. We got into residency. And so we were working such long hours that you honestly didn't have time to eat. And so we were naturally just eating just at the end of the day. And I feel like now in the more recent years, we've transitioned almost into an OMAD diet, which is the one meal a day, where really we're just eating dinner as our
which
main meal.
which that is also a version of intermittent fasting where people are fasting 23 hours and eating the 1 hour.
Right.
So let me step back for a second and tell you what you can consume in your fasting period. It's not like a religious fast where you're not allowed to eat anything. You can drink water, you can have black coffee. Basically, what you're trying to avoid is raising your insulin levels. And that leads us into how this whole thing is beneficial. So, insulin, basically, when insulin is up in the body, that is your body's way of keeping everything stored. So, it's storage mode. So if you're always eating all the time, the insulin is always elevated all the time. So your body is always in storage mode. When insulin comes down, other hormones come out that now tell the body to, okay, start burning fat, use that for energy. And then when the fat burns, it converts it to ketone bodies, which typically start coming out into the 12 to 16-hour window. But this ketone body is different than the ketogenic diet, which we can talk about in a different podcast. So basically, when insulin levels are low, the body has a signal to let's start burning energy, let's start burning fat. When insulin levels are high, you're always storing fat.
Hmm. Yeah, so that's the whole premise behind it is in all those hours that you're not eating, your insulin levels are staying really low. So like you were saying, the things that you are allowed to eat during your fast is anything that's not going to cause a glucose spike, right? So you can have water, you can have black coffee, you can have tea without any sugar in it. So for a lot of people, the biggest hindrance is caffeine because a lot of us are so dependent on caffeine to stay awake and in our morning. So that's definitely something that you can still incorporate into your diet.
Unfortunately, you would have to drop the creamers and the
Yeah,
sugar. You would have to flip over to just black.
exactly.
Remember, we're trying to avoid insulin, and any kind of sugar calorie will raise insulin, right?
Right. Your body releases insulin when you consume any kind of glucose. And so the caveat over here is that where you have to be careful, like we were saying earlier, well, when you're eating less, it gives you a little bit more freedom with what you can eat. Is you also have to be very careful with what you are eating in those hours. Because you have now less hours, you have less hours to get the nutrition that you need as well, because your body needs certain things.
And protein is the biggest one. So here's one of the areas where people struggle is when they restrict their eating window, they find it hard to get their protein requirement in. So that is something you really need to balance because less protein leads to less muscle, and then that leads to a lot of illnesses down the road as we age. So you must be able to get that protein in there for sure.
Right. So it's one of the things that I do because I know that I'm not going to be eating for the majority of the day. And before I sit down to eat, I make sure that I've always had my protein before. So I'll have my protein shake first before I eat something else. So that in case I get really full, I'm not then being lazy and saying, okay, whatever, I can't really, muster up a protein shake right now because that protein is more important than the meal that you're going to have. So you need to make sure you get that in. So it's not a free for all, I didn't eat for 20 hours, so now I can just binge for 2 hours. That's not what it is. You still have to be cautious about what you're eating. But at the very least, you're at least starting to work on how frequently or when you're eating. You know, one of the other really big things that having low insulin production does is lower your disease for diabetes in the future. Because diabetes, type 2 diabetes, which is a diabetes we develop when we get older, it develops because your cells become resistant to insulin. What that means is your cells are not listening to insulin anymore. Okay, so normally you would eat something, insulin would be released, and insulin would tell your cells, "Hey, take up all this
Glucose.
glucose, right, and store it inside." Okay, if your cells are not listening to insulin, they're no longer going to take that glucose inside, and that glucose is now running around your bloodstream,
And then your pancreas is pumping more and
more
more
insulin
insulin
out.
out to get that glucose away. Hence insulin insensitivity, and then there goes the next step is diabetes and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. So when you're existing in states where your body's not releasing insulin, basically your cells are just not getting yelled at enough, right? Like imagine if you yell at your kid all day and say, do this, do this, do this, eventually your kid stops listening, right? So if insulin is continuously there and it's continuously saying, pick this up, pick this up, pick this up, at the end of the day, the cells will stop listening. So that's a really big benefit. And then do you want to talk about the autophagy?
Yes, that's another really interesting benefit of this. So when our body is continuously in storage mode, just keep storing stuff, because there's always abundant glucose around, basically, right? Uh, our cells don't get a chance to pause and repair itself. So when we are in an when you are in that fasted state, your insulin levels are low. Now the cells in your body can actually break down the old material, the junk, clean it up, recycle stuff. That process is called autophagy, where the body cleans the old material, the old cells. But that process only turns on when insulin is down. Because remember what I always keep saying, insulin is the storage hormone. Insulin is out there saying, just keep on adding on. And those cells, they're just always continuously working. The self cleaning process, autophagy, never turns on if insulin is always up.
Hmm.
So you're fasting, insulin is down. Now your cells start cleaning. So what that means for you, it's almost akin to anti-aging. You have more cleaner cells, newer mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell, of the body. So you stay younger longer, you stay energetic longer.
Yeah. I mean, it's think of your house, right? If you are always working and you never have a chance to clean your house is going to get dirtier, it's going to get damaged faster, it's going to break down faster, right? Whereas if you have periods in the middle where you're not working, so if your cells are not working to store everything because insulin is commanding it, then you have time to clean your house, you can take care of it, it'll last longer, it needs less repairs, right? And so your cells, by taking a break and repairing themselves and getting rid of the material that we don't need, are doing that exact same cleanup for your body.
Absolutely correct.
So the
Now,
last thing I guess we should hit on is the, you know, who can't
if you have
do it.
comorbidities,
Yeah.
correct. So
Yeah.
comorbidities, if you have diseases, and the biggest ones, there could be a lot. So first and foremost, don't take the message away from our podcast that you're going to start doing intermittent fasting.
Hmm.
You always have to discuss this with your doctor. Is this something that is good for me? Can you talk to me about this?
Yeah.
Because now I'm about to tell you why with a certain diseases. Okay, so type 2 diabetics. These are individuals that have a high level of insulin. They have high insulin insensitivity, and then these people are also on medications. Some of them are insulin, and they're on our medications like sulfonylureas. Glipizide is a common one. Insulin and glipizide. So insulin, you're injecting outside insulin, and then the glipizide medication is telling your pancreas to keep releasing insulin all the time. So now, if you're in a fasted state, you're not getting the glucose into your bloodstream. So obviously, your medications need to be adjusted. So that's why you have to work really closely with your primary care provider if you're going to go on this journey, because your medications are going to need to be adjusted because your bloodstream is no longer getting hit with all that glucose and extra, food that's being taken in. Individuals that honestly require real close supervision if they want to partake into this, but I would recommend not, are type 1 diabetics. These people have no insulin whatsoever coming out of the body. So if they go into fasted states, it gets really hard for us to manage the amount of insulin they need. Because their pancreas releases no insulin at all times, type 1 diabetics need a certain amount of insulin that they got to keep injecting into them. So if they're fasting, that can become erratic. Maybe they're giving
Hmm.
themselves too much insulin and they're going to have lows, or they're not giving themselves enough insulin, and now their body is going to go into overdrive on fat burning, which is going to release more ketone bodies, and then that leads to a process called DKA. So those kind of individuals we caution against.
Yep.
Honestly, type 2 diabetics can partake in this, and then there are other certain conditions that you must discuss with your doctor if this is the right move for you.
Yep.
But certainly, if you zoom back out and look at the big picture, if you're controlling your insulin by fasting like this and you're reducing your calorie intake, your overall metabolic health is improving.
Hmm.
Your weight is coming down, your blood pressure is going to start coming down, which means now we can adjust some meds and remove them.
Hmm.
Your diabetic medications are going to start coming down because you're now controlling your insulin and not always blasting it, by
Yeah.
continuously eating.
You're at less risk for becoming a diabetic. You're decreasing the inflammation in your body. There are theories out there that by the process of autophagy and the decreased inflammation, theoretically, it could lead to lowering of cancer rates because ultimately cancer comes from increased cell turnover, and we get increased cell turnover when we have increased levels of insulin all the time. So it is definitely something that can work for a lot of people.
Some of the other benefits, honestly, is time saving. It's
Yeah,
insane. It's insane.
yeah,
When you're not thinking about what's for breakfast, what's for lunch,
yeah.
my God, the amount of time that we've gotten back in our day because we're not doing lunch or breakfast. It's
Yeah. And we make exceptions, when we go on vacation, we eat whatever we want because we know we're very strict in our regular life so that we can give ourselves the cheat days and the breaks that we need.
and that point what she made is excellent because once you start this journey, initially it's hard because your body needs to get used to not eating. If you're eating all the time, those hormones are always coming out at the same time. which is why you get hungry around breakfast or
Mm-hmm.
lunch because you're used to that.
Yep.
To break out of that cycle, it takes some time. But once you're broken out, you get more clarity. Eventually, you do this long enough, then you begin to understand how this works, your body, and all that stuff. Then you can always adjust.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily stick to the strict 16/8 forever. If there's some great food at work, I'm
Then
gonna
you
eat
treat.
it. I don't
Yeah.
really care. I'm gonna eat it.
Yeah.
But that's how long I've come into my journey.
Yeah. You have to
So
get to the
that's what it
level where you
is.
know that skipping a day or breaking the pattern for a day isn't going to throw you off because your regular is the intermittent fasting. So for us, it's so like every day that's what regular life just is.
That's why this is not a diet. This is a forever way of
Yep.
living.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we hope you learned something new today. Um, we'll come back with another episode dedicated to the ketogenic diet. Remember, I said that was a whole separate thing
Mm-hmm.
in itself. Um, so stay tuned for more. All right.